Hello everyone, I'm back. Hey, I'm really happy to be back and I thank you guys for being so patient. Several of you have been asking when I'm going to come out with another tutorial, so here I am. I just want to thank you for the overwhelming response to my beginner's sewing course. You guys, oh my goodness, I didn't expect for you to be so pleased with the tutorials, and I am just very grateful because I know how great I feel when I find a tutorial that is very helpful to me. So based on the response from you guys, the tutorials have been very helpful. So thank you for responding, thank you for following, and I just want to say let's get back into it. I have another tutorial for you guys today. And this is not part of the beginner sewing course, of course, because that's over, but I will be doing tutorials of some of the outfits I'll be making for myself. And I promised that to you guys, so here we are. And as you can tell, I have a white background. That's because we recently moved, and that's why it took me so long to get back into it, because we, of course, as you can imagine, when you move, you have a lot of work to do, and we're doing some renovating in our home. So I haven't gotten to my sewing room yet. So be patient with me. You will get to see the transformation as it happens. Now, let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be sewing this cute little knit dress. And the pattern that we're going to be using is McCall's 7430. Now, this is a very easy pattern to sew, but if you don't know how to sew, then I want to refer you back to my beginner's sewing course where you will learn the basics of sewing your own clothes, and then you can come back and join us in this tutorial. Now, this pattern calls for medium weight stretch fabric, so make sure you don't try to make this dress with a woven fabric because it will come out too small for you. All right, now I'm going to be using these two fabrics. This stripe, it's I got this at the Michael Levine Loft in downtown Los Angeles, and it's like a lycra. It has a really good stretch in it, so I think it's a lycra. And then I'm going to use this double knit that has about the same amount of stretch as this one. So those are the two that I'm going to use for the dress. Oh, and we are making view A with no sleeves. Now, if you know how to sew already, or if you're a beginner and you know how to put in sleeves, then you can go ahead and do one of the other views. But I'm going to be showing you view A in this tutorial. And one thing to note is in my view, in view A, it has a curved hem. I'm not doing the curved hem. I'm going to do a straight hem. So, you know, just so you know, when we're constructing it, you'll see the difference. So for those of you who need are my plus size sew sisters, this pattern only goes up to a size 22. If you need a larger size, then I'm going to refer you over to Andrea at Sew to Fit. And she has a tutorial where she teaches you how to grade your pattern up to a larger size, okay? And you will find that information in the drop box below, and you will also find that information on my blog in today's blog post. All right, so that's your pattern. Make sure you get your fabric. Make sure you pre-treat your fabric before cutting into it so that you don't risk your garment shrinking when you go to clean it after you wear it. The other things you're gonna need are a ruler, any kind of ruler. If you don't have a ruler like this, you can use a yardstick. You're going to need your seam gauge, your marking tools, your chalk roller, a marking pencil or a marking pen, your tracing paper and your tracing wheel. You're also going to need all of your scissors, your fabric scissors, your paper scissors, and your little nips, your little tiny scissors that you're going to use at the machine for cutting away the threads. If you don't have these, you can easily use either one of those scissors. Go ahead and make sure you use your tape measure because you want to take your measurements before purchasing your pattern. For those of you who are new to sewing and you're going to attempt this dress, make sure you choose the size that you're going to cut based on the finished measurements that are on the tissue paper. Okay, that's very important. If you want your garment to fit nicely, choose your size that you're going to cut based on the finished measurements on the pattern tissue. Okay? You are going to most likely need your seam ripper for mistakes. And then you can use straight pins. Since we're using a knit fabric, make sure you get ballpoint pins, or you can use these metal washers, or if you have another type of paper weight or a pattern weight. Okay, so that's all you're going to need for the tutorial. Now for pattern pieces 1 and 4, your front and back for the dress, I'm going to have you guys to make a mark, a line on this pattern piece for a certain part during construction where it's not very clear where you should start your stay stitching. So go ahead and grab a pencil, and you want to grab your ruler or your yardstick. And if you will look at the pattern piece, I'm working with pattern piece number 1, the front pattern piece. You will see the waistline symbol here, and then there is a line here. What I want you to do is we're going to extend this line all the way to the other edge of this pattern piece. So go ahead and line up your ruler. Make sure that it lines up right on that line, that it's even. And then you're just going to take your pencil and extend that line all the way to the edge. Okay? And you're going to do this on pattern piece number 1 and pattern piece number 4. Then after you do that, when you get ready to cut out your fabric, I already have my piece cut out. When you go to line it up, let me put this down. You're going to, let me remove this pin. So after you have your fabric cut out from this piece and piece number 4, you're going to take a marking pin, or you can use a straight pin, and right where that line is that you extended to the edge, go ahead and mark your fabric right there, just on the edge. You don't need to go all the way across, just on the edge. So you can use your pen or pencil to mark it, or you can just use a pin and insert your straight pin right at that point. Or if you'd like, you can use your scissors and just snip in just a tiny bit, okay? And you want to do that to the front and the back pieces, and then you'll see why we did that when we start sewing those pieces together. All right, I'll meet you back here, get all of your pieces cut out, get your markings transferred onto your fabric, and make sure you make any adjustments that you need to make to your pattern pieces. I always have to do a sway back adjustment on mine, so I took care of that. And I like to lengthen my skirt, my dresses usually, because I prefer to wear mine below the knee, so you can see that my dress is longer than the one on the pattern envelope, the model on the pattern envelope. So go ahead and take care of all of that, and then I'll meet you back at the sewing machine. Okay, now that you have your pattern pieces cut out and you have your markings transferred onto your fabric, we're going to start with pattern piece number 1. Now, you can follow along with your instruction sheet if you'd like, but just to forewarn you that I will be working out of order at some parts, okay? But go ahead and follow along with your instruction sheet if you'd like. Grab your front piece, piece number 1, and make sure that you have marked that waistline mark that I showed you at the cutting table. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to insert a line of stay stitching from that waistline mark all the way up to the edge. Okay, now there was no indication in the instruction sheet. It says to insert stay stitching from the top to above the waistline. Well, some of you may not know exactly where that is, so that's why I had you to make that marking. So go ahead and place your fabric under your presser foot, right at that mark that we made for the waistline. And I am using a presser foot or a walking foot to sew my garment. If you don't have a walking foot, that's fine. You can use a regular presser foot. You may want to test on scrap pieces to get the proper tension so that when you're sewing, the bottom layer is not slipping. So that's why I'm using a walking foot, because it's really helpful when sewing knits to keep those 2 layers of fabric together. So line that up. I am using a straight stitch at a 2.5 length, and you want to make sure that your needle is lined up centered with your presser foot. Make sure your fabric is lined up at the 1/2 inch mark on your needle plate. Go ahead and lower your needle. I'm going to remove that pin, and we're going to do a straight stitch all the way to the end. And you don't need to do a back stitch. Then we're going to snip that thread. And that's your first row of stay stitching. Now, on the same side, we're going to do a row of ease stitching. And the ease stitching we're going to do in between the two notches. Hopefully you did make those, transfer those marks from your tissue paper onto your fabric. So between these two notches, we're going to, excuse me, we're going to run a row of ease stitching right between there. So go ahead and place your fabric again under the plate, starting right at the notch. Now, I want you to go ahead and do the same thing with your back piece. You're going to do a row of stay stitching on both sides of your back piece, but you're not going to do ease stitching. So go ahead and run stay stitching on both sides of your front piece and your back piece, then run one row of ease stitching at your longest length on your stitch selector for the front piece, and then meet me back here. Now, for those of you who are sewing the curved hem, go ahead and follow step number 3 on the instruction sheet to take care of that reinforcement in the corner, and then you can join me on the next step, which will be attaching the yoke front to the front of the dress. So go ahead and grab your yoke front piece, and we're going to attach it to the front, the top of the front, with the right sides together. So this is the right side of my yoke, this is the right side of my dress. I'm going to lay them on top of each other, and I'm going to go ahead and match the notches and pin. Match the notch on the other side and pin. Then I'm going to go and line up the edges and pin. The same thing on the other side. Now you'll notice I'm inserting my pins parallel to the edges. If you prefer to insert your pins perpendicular, that's totally fine. It's just a matter of preference. Now we're going to run a stitch from one end to the other end, and we are going to use a zigzag stitch. So go ahead and change your stitch selector on your machine to a zigzag. Your stitch length will be 2.5 and your stitch width will be 0.5. So we're going to do a very narrow zigzag stitch. All right, go ahead and insert your fabric, and our seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch. So insert your fabric at the 5/8 inch mark on your machine. And we're going to back stitch first. And then stitch forward all the way to the end, removing your pins as you go. And back stitch. Go ahead and snip your threads. And your yoke is attached. Now what I want you to do is to go ahead and trim away some of your seam allowance. And I'm going to trim away just a little under half of the seam allowance. And just to let you know, if you'd like, you can finish your seam allowances with a serger, or you can use your pinking shears, or you can use a zigzag stitch, but make sure you do them separately because we're going to press our seam allowances open. Now we're going to go to the ironing station and we're going to press our seam. We're going to press it flat on both sides first, then we're going to open it up and press these seams open, okay, on both sides. So I'll meet you at the pressing station. Okay, before you press or apply your iron to your fabric, make sure that your iron plate is clean because you don't want to transfer any marks onto your fabric, and make sure that your iron is on the steam setting and that you have water in your iron. So let's go ahead and press this seam flat. Make sure you use your pressing cloth. I like to make it a habit of using the pressing cloth to make sure I don't burn or get any marks on my fabric. So we're going to press down. And we're going to do that on both sides. Pressing is such an important part of sewing, you guys. It's just as important as the stitching because it helps you to get a nice, really smooth finished seam, and you get that really beautiful professional look in your sewing. So make sure you don't skip that step. And then we're going to open that seam with your finger. Just kind of finger press it open. And take your press cloth and put it over. Okay, making sure that it's open. Okay, and just kind of, if you can see, walk the pressing cloth down on top of the seam as you press it open. Okay. Keeping that open, go ahead and press, making sure that it's open. Okay, then we're going to turn it over to the other side and do the same thing. Make sure that the seam is open. You can feel it. If you feel any lumps, then you know you need to go and straighten that out. Okay. And there you have a really nice clean seam there. Okay, now let's go ahead and go back to the sewing machine. What I want you to do with your back piece, this is our front piece, I want you to go ahead and attach your back yoke piece to the back piece, the front back. And I want you to go ahead and do the same thing. Do your zigzag stitch, come to the, or trim it, and then come to your ironing station and press. And then I'll meet you back at the sewing machine. Okay, at this point you should have your yoke front and your yoke back attached to the front and back of your dress. The next step, remember I told you I won't be working in order of the instructions on the pattern instruction sheet. So the next step that I'm going to show you is attaching the stay tape to the shoulder seams. Now, this is the stay tape, and I've already attached one side so that you can see what it looks like. So I centered this stay tape, or hem tape it's called, over my seam allowance. And we're going to do the same thing. So what you're going to do is take your seam gauge and make sure you set it at 5/8 of an inch. Take your chalk roller or a marking pen or pencil, whichever you prefer. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and mark the 5/8 inch seam line onto our fabric to make it easier to place this or to center the hem tape. So go ahead and using your chalk roller, I'm going to turn it this way to make it easier for you to see as I roll it. Measure from the edge of your fabric and go ahead and mark the line. Hopefully you can see me doing that. I don't want to block the view, but you get the idea. Okay, so mark it all the way to the end, from one end to the other. And you want to use a contrasting thread, but if you're using a white fabric like I am, use the lightest contrasting color, you know, as you can if you're using a marking pencil or pen. The chalk we can wipe away. I'm going to make one more mark here. And one more right there. Just to make sure we get a full line. Okay, so there is the line that we're going to use. Now we're going to take the stay tape and we're going to center it right on that line. Okay, and the way we're going to know that it's centered is, again, we're going to take our seam gauge and we're going to measure from the edge, and if it's hitting, see how it's not on the center of that tape, it's hitting just a little down above, we're going to just move the tape up to where we think the center is. Okay, and then you can go ahead and pin. So pin your stay tape onto the yoke. You can do perpendicular or horizontal. That's a terrible pinning job I just did. Okay, so let's do that again. Okay, and you can kind of eyeball it, or if you'd like, you can continue to go using your seam gauge to measure to make sure you're on the mark. And as you're inserting your pins, because you're going to be sewing in this direction toward your fingers, go ahead and insert the tips inside so that you don't stick yourself when you're pulling your pins out. Okay, I'm going to measure that and make sure I'm just okay. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and just do a straight stitch from one edge to the other. So get your machine set on a straight stitch, center your needle, and make sure you're at a 2.5 length. Okay, go ahead and place the edge of your fabric at the 5/8 inch mark. And remove that first pin, and we're going to backstitch. And then stitch all the way to the end. And backstitch. Clip our threads. And there you have your stay tape on both sides. And what this does is it strengthens your garment in the shoulder area where it will get the most stress from wear. So when we attach this top yoke piece to the shoulder edge of your the front yoke piece, then you have more support in this area. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and attach the side, front, and back pieces to our front and back. Okay, starting with our dress front, we're going to attach the side, front, and back piece to the dress front. Now, make sure you grab one of your side front, side back pieces, and with your front piece, the front of the dress, laid out with the right side facing up, you're going to take a side front piece and you're going to match up the notch. Now, this piece has a single notch on one side and it has a single notch on the other side. So you're going to match up the notch with the notch that's on your dress front, not the first notch, but the second notch down. Because if you try to match it with the notch up here, you have all this fabric extending up. So go ahead and take this notch on the side front and match it to the second notch on the front of your dress and pin. Then go ahead and take the edge of the side front and pin it to the edge of your front. Okay, then if you lay it flat, you're going to see you have this curve on the side front piece and not so much on the front piece. So what you're going to do is with that curve, find the center of it, and wherever it falls, take it and just match it to the dress front and pin. Then remember we inserted E-stitching? The E-stitch is to be used if your skirt or the front of your dress is much bigger than the side front piece. But in this case, it doesn't look like we're going to have much of an issue. So what we're going to do is with the curve of the side front that's extended over that dress, we're going to do the same thing. Take the center piece and just put it right where it falls and pin. Okay, and see how that fits in? That fits in. Now let's look at this piece, and that appears to be fitting also. Now again, if the front of your dress had excess fabric, then what you would do is you would take the E-stitch and you would pull it. You would pull it and gather it in so that the dress portion fits with the side front. Okay, so since they're already fitting, we're not going to worry about it. Okay, so put in however many pins you feel is necessary for you, and then go ahead and continue pinning down the side front of the dress all the way to the end, and I've already gone down to the end, and we're going to sew from the bottom all the way up. Now remember, we have all of these pins, the ends are sticking out, so what you want to do is go through and insert those pins down into the fabric so that when you come near those pins in the sewing process, you're not sticking yourself as you're pulling the pins out this direction. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to do a narrow zigzag stitch from the bottom, the hem of the dress, all the way up to the top. So go ahead and set your machine for a zigzag stitch at 0.5 again for your width and 2.5 for your length. Insert your fabric at the 5/8 inch mark, and we're just going to zigzag all the way from this edge to the end. And we're going to back stitch first. And I need my glasses. And remove the pins, of course, as you come to them. And because we're doing a narrow zigzag stitch, you do not need to stretch your fabric as you sew. Allow the feed dogs to feed your fabric through. And make sure you're adjusting your fabric as you go to make sure that the edges are lined up evenly. As we're coming up on the curve on this side front, I want you to make sure that you follow the curve. Make sure you're not pulling your fabric straight to keep it going straight. Just follow the natural curve. And remove your pins. So as you're coming on the curve, just adjust your fabric, keep it flat on your needle plate, and follow the curve. If you try to stretch the fabric to keep it straight so that you can continue to sew a straight line, you could possibly distort the fabric or get a really weird seam. So let's just keep it flat and follow the curve. Just turning the fabric as you go. Making sure that underneath there are no puckers or folds that you're sewing into the fabric. And backstitch. Okay, so we have that seam sewn in. What you're going to do is you're going to go ahead with your fabric scissors and you're going to trim away your seam allowance again. Okay, and then when you come to your curve after you trim away your seam allowance, let me do a bit of that so I can demonstrate what I'm going to tell you to do. So go ahead and trim away a little less than half of your seam allowance. And you're going to do that all the way to the end. And right here on the curve, I want you to snip in, not too close to the seam allowance because you don't want to snip through the threads. But you're going to snip the seam allowance on the curve just to make sure that when you sew or when you press that seam open, it's going to lie flat. Okay, so just a few snips, and then go ahead and finish trimming your seam allowance, and then you're going to go to the pressing station and you're going to press your seams flat on both sides first, then you're going to press the seam open. Okay, and make sure you do the same process for the other side and your front piece will be complete. Okay, now that you have attached the side, front, and back pieces to the front of the dress, now we're going to attach those pieces to the back of the dress. So go ahead and grab the back piece, and you're going to use the same technique or process that you used to attach the front piece to the side front. You're going to pin matching your notch here on the back and the side back. Now remember, for the back piece we did not install gathering or e-stitching, so we don't need to pull any threads to fit. So this piece should fit nicely, and I've already pinned from the bottom up, so we're just going to work in this area. So go ahead and continue pinning. And it should fit in just nicely if it was cut properly. If for some reason your pieces are a little off, then remember this is knit fabric and it has stretch, so you can just stretch it to fit. Okay, so that's just fine. Then we're going to do the same thing that we did with the front pieces, or the front piece. We're going to sew a narrow zigzag stitch from the bottom all the way to the top. Then you're going to go ahead and trim away a little less than half of your seam. You're going to snip on the curve, and then you're going to go to your pressing station and you're going to press your seams flat first on both sides. Then you're going to press the seams open, and I want you to do that to both sides of your back, and then your dress will be constructed, and then we're going to go ahead and sew in the shoulder seams. So go ahead and attach the back and then meet me back here at the machine. Okay, this is where we are so far. We're looking at the back of the dress. With the yoke, we have applied our seam binding. We have our side back sections attached, and we have pressed our seams open. And you turn it over to the other side and you have our front with the yoke and the side front seams attached. Okay, now this is a princess seam dress, so you have princess seams in the front and princess seams in the back, so you will not have any side seams. Okay, so our next step is we're going to attach the shoulder, the front yoke to the back yoke at the shoulders. So what you're going to do is go ahead and pin the shoulders together, matching the notches, making sure that your seams are meeting on the edges. Okay, if you need to, you can go ahead and insert another pin there. So you're going to do that on both sides. Now I want you to notice, if you will take a look here, this edge will not meet up with that edge, and it should not. You transferred a dot on both sides of the yoke. Those dots should match up on both sides. So don't worry if you have this fabric extending from the front yoke. It's supposed to be that way. That's not a mistake. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run a zigzag stitch, a narrow zigzag stitch, from one end to the other on both shoulders. Okay. Go ahead and insert your fabric at the 5/8 inch mark. And stick the edge of that pin in so you don't stick yourself when you pull it out. Go ahead and back stitch. Make sure your end edges are even. And back stitch. Okay, so that's attached. You're going to use your fabric scissors, trim away the seam allowance, go to the pressing station, and you're going to press it flat on both sides, and then you're going to press it open. Do that for both shoulders, and then meet me back here at the sewing machine. We now have our shoulders attached and pressed flat. The next step is we're going to do a stay stitch around the neckline, and that is to strengthen the neckline so that it doesn't stretch out of shape when we go to apply the collar. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the neckline. If you have a free arm in your machine, go ahead and remove the free arm to make it easier to place your fabric onto your machine. Okay, so we're going to run a stay stitch, and we're going to continue to use our narrow zigzag stitch because we still need to have stretch in this area, and using a straight stitch will eliminate a lot of the stretch that you have. So let's go ahead and insert it at the 1/2 inch mark. Then we're going to go ahead and just run a stitch all the way around. You don't need to back stitch. And make sure you keep the edge of your fabric right at the 1/2 inch mark on your needle plate. Now I want to bring to your attention something here. You see here the neck edge is higher than this one here. What I'm going to do is, because I didn't check that ahead of time so that I could snip it off, I could easily take my scissors and snip it right here. But if I weren't able, or if you have that issue and you're not able to snip that off, then keep your eye on this edge of the fabric, anticipating this edge lining up with the 1/2 inch mark, so that when you're sewing past this higher edge here, then you you will have more fabric in the seam allowance than you will when you make it around here. To eliminate this happening, just make sure you check your seams where they meet before you sew your neck edge anytime. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and manipulate that around. Now I'm coming up on a seam allowance here and it's flat, but I want to make sure that it doesn't flip over as I'm sewing. So I'm going to take my time around this area. And if you have an issue where it starts to pucker, lift your presser foot and just flatten it out with something or with your finger and then continue. And manipulate the fabric on the curve and make sure it's on the 1/2 inch mark all the way around. And we're coming back around to the beginning. And again, I'm going slow over the seam allowance to make sure I don't get puckering. And we're done. We're going to snip all of the threads. And now our neck edge is reinforced so that if we do get stretching, or if we're stretching it while we're inserting the collar, then we don't have to worry about it stretching out of shape. Now, my advice is that you go ahead and try on your dress at this point to check for fit. And if it's too big in the waist or anywhere, then you need to go ahead and make the adjustments at the sewing machine. So try it on, you know, pinch out wherever it's too big. Now remember, you don't have side seams on this dress. You only have the princess seams. So you're going to need to pinch out any extra fabric at the princess seams. And I would do that evenly between all 4 seams, the front and the back. So go ahead and check that, and once you have made any adjustments that you need to make, join me back here at the sewing machine because we're going to go ahead and attach the collar. Okay, grab your collar piece, and I want you to fold your collar in half, making sure that the edge with the single notch is the edge that you're going to be sewing your seam on. Now you have 2 notches on the other side. You don't want to fold that side together because that's how you're going to attach your collar to your neckline. So with your wrong sides together, you're going to fold this in half and start pinning right where that single notch is. And pin all the way down using however many pins you feel is necessary for your comfort. And then we're going to do a narrow zigzag stitch from one end to the other. Back stitching. Snip your threads. Okay, this time we're not going to trim the seam allowance because we don't need to. What you're going to do is you're going to go to your pressing station and you're going to, of course, press the seam flat on both sides. Then you're going to press it open, press it open and flat on both sides. Then we're going to come back to the machine and you're going to take these 2 edges and you're going to fold them together and turn that in. So what we're doing is we're folding our collar in half again, but this time with the wrong sides together. And then we're going to go ahead and pin the collar together all the way around, making sure you match the seams and making sure you match the notches. Okay, here is our collar, and I have pressed it, I folded it in half and pinned it. Now, for your neck edge, we need to find the center back for this so that we can make sure that the seam on the collar is even with the center back on the neckline. So we weren't given a marking for that. So what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and fold with the back edge facing you. Fold this in half and line up the seams. Line up the seams. I'm sorry. Fold it in half with the seams this way and find the center back. And you can either go ahead and snip that with your scissors, or you can mark it with a marking pin, or you can just insert a straight pin to keep that spot so that when we pin our collar, we'll be right on. Now, to insert the collar, we're going to go ahead and put it inside the neck, the opening of the neckline, the neck hole. And, oops, let me turn it the other way. Make sure you insert it to where the seam, the back seam, is next to the center back of the neckline. Okay, so go ahead and line up that seam with the center back of the neckline and pin. Now, you can take the pins that you have inserted or that you have used to fold the neckline and attach that to the neckline. Wow, I'm just tongue twisted today. All right, and you can place your pins on the inside with the collar or on the outside next to the neckline, whichever you prefer. I guess it really depends on how you're going to insert your dress, the neckline, onto your machine. If you're going this way, then of course put your pins on the outside. If you're going to be sewing with the collar facing up, then place your pins on the side of the collar. I'm going to go with the collar, so I should be placing my pins on the inside. And as far as your side seams on the dress, they should be even with the markings that you transferred onto your collar from your pattern pieces. Now I can see mine from this side because I'm using a white fabric, and I can see that yellow marking through my fabric. If you're using a colored fabric and you can't see the marking, then you need to transfer that marking from the inside to the outside of your fabric. Okay, so line that mark up with the seam line on the neck, or with the seam line on the neckline of the dress. Okay, let's go ahead and get this side even. And there's my mark, and I have the pin right in that spot. That's good. Okay, then we're going to match the notches on the front of the neckline with the notches on the collar. Pin that together, and we should be good. If you need to, go ahead and insert more pins, whatever you need for your comfort. And then we're going to go ahead and sew this together. Again, we're going to be using a narrow zigzag stitch because we need the stretch in the collar to pull it over our heads. I'm going to remove my free arm again so that I can place my neck opening around that arm to make it easier for me. Okay, so I'm going to start at the center back and place that around, and at the 5/8 inch mark, I'm going to go ahead and just sew all the way around the neckline. I'm going to back stitch and just sew all the way around, making sure that your edges are even. When you come up on that seam, make sure that it's flat when you go around. and also making sure that you're not sewing in any puckers. So if you need to, open it up, follow the curve of the fabric, and make sure that it's flat. And back stitch. Go ahead and snip your threads away, and then we're going to go ahead and trim away the seam allowance again, like we have done throughout the project. And when we press this time, we're going to press our seams toward the dress. Okay, I have trimmed away the seam allowance for the collar. Now I'm going to open it or pull it out, and there we have our collar. Then we're going to go to the, or you're going to go to the pressing station, and you're going to press your seam allowance down toward your dress. So flip your collar out, pull the seam allowance down, and then you're going to press it. First, you're going to press it flat on both sides like we always do. And then you're going to press it down toward the dress all the way around. And then we'll be done with the collar. So you go ahead and do that, and then meet me back here at the sewing machine, and we're going to do a narrow hem for our sleeve to finish off the edges. And then we're going to hem the bottom of our dress. So go ahead and take care of your pressing of the collar and meet me back here. To finish off our sleeve, the armhole opening, not the sleeve, we're not attaching a sleeve. To finish off the armhole opening, I went ahead and I inserted, or I sewed in a 5/8 inch narrow zigzag stitch all the way around the armhole. And I'm going to use that as a guide for pressing over my seam allowance to sew in or to finish off this seam. So what you're going to do is turn your dress inside out. And then I'm using a sleeve board. If you don't have one, you can use your regular ironing board or a tabletop board or whatever you use to do your ironing or your pressing. So then go ahead and fold the armhole over. I need my glasses. Go ahead and fold it over just to where you see the stitching. Now you can't see it on my white fabric. So let's go here on the pink fabric because I use a white thread. So go ahead and fold over just to where you see the stitching on the inside. So the stitching should fold over to the inside, okay? And then you're going to go ahead and press. And you're going to use that stitching as your guideline to press over your fold, the seam allowance. All right, now you can't see the white stitching. I can see it and I can feel it. And that's the good thing about putting in that guide stitching is you can feel it. It creates kind of a ridge to fold over the fabric. Now after you go ahead and press the seam allowance over or press in the fold all the way around the armhole, go back and fold in the seam allowance to the fold and fold, press it or lay it flat. So again, you're going to fold in the edge to where it meets the fold, and then you're going to press again. Okay, and you're going to do that all the way around both armholes. Okay, you guys, that completes our dress. We are done. I have closed up my armholes. I have sewn in my seam or hem. You can use whichever technique you'd like to finish off your hem. I did not show that in the tutorial because you should know by now how to do a tutorial or how to do a hem. Even those of you who are new to sewing, if you followed my beginner sewing course or any sewing course, you know how to do a hem. So I decided to just skip that part of the video, of the tutorial. So this is it. Thank you guys so much for following, for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial. I will be coming back with more. And in the meantime, I just want to send a shout out to all of those who are currently battling breast cancer, because this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I want to send a shout out to you, and this video, this tutorial, and this dress actually is in honor of you and those who have lost their battle with cancer. And for those who are survivors, cancer survivors, I shout out to you. And to those who are battling or have lost their fight with all kinds of cancer. I know this is Breast Cancer Awareness, but I just want to send my love to those of you. I had just lost a very dear friend to cancer, and this is for her. This is for Cece. Okay, you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to hear from you. Let me know if you like the dress. If you have any questions, you can send messages. And remember, when you live in your design, it is from there that God shines. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.